really use the term. All right, I'm about to stir the pot, and I realize I'm opening myself up for accusations of sticking my nose where it doesn't belong, but here I am passively observing the drama unfolding on spiritual TikTok and witch talk, and I don't have like an overall opinion at this time. I'm not judging anyone in a broader sense, but I'm seeing in these comments this conversation unfold where we're denying that spiritual psychosis exists and chalking it up to some sort of nefarious, tool to keep us down and unawake. And I'm speaking as somebody who believes in energy. I use magic. I don't believe that spiritual psychosis is people just being completely deluded, but what I believe is happening, and I think this is a very, very important thing to recognize that it does happen and not just erase it, is that people will tap into very real energy, but in a way that is ungrounded, in a way that is unprepared, and in a way that's ultimately dangerous and can leave them harmed. And I personally think that a lot of, or all of, what is harmful and what is dangerous basically stems from colonization, whitewashing, appropriation, and in another sense basically stems from fear and hate and ego and anxiety. But nonetheless, it's absolutely possible for somebody to have experiences that they're not ready for and to be harmed. And so I think that it's really dangerous to not teach what that looks like and to not point to the kind of shadow work you would need to do to unpack that kind of thing and do these things in a safe way. And to say that it's just your own reality and you deny others is part of that colonizing rhetoric, because we are all one thing. And to see yourself as an individual with a reality that can be separated from the rest of us, even though I agree that you create it with your mind, you are us, you are all of us, and we are you. And you can't just step outside of the external matrix that you're in just because you recognize you're in it. That's step one. Step two is actually doing the work to make sure that the external reflects the internal. And until you've done that, your belief that you've stepped outside of it is really it's just ego. So I do think it's very, very important to articulate that spiritual psychosis is a thing. I totally agree, and it reminds me of one time when I was handed some free literature on my college campus that was a book written by somebody who called themselves a swami, but I think may have just been a cult leader, and I don't even remember the name of the person, but I remember opening the book, and in even the introductory part, it was like, hey, are you someone who's looking for answers in the world, who feels a deep pit in your stomach and a sense of dissatisfaction with everything, and a sense of, there must be something more, and you haven't found the answers, and then it's like selling you that this cult or whatever he was selling was your answer. Like, that immediately made me close the book, because I said to myself, no, I don't have that sense of like deep needing some kind of external answer. And because of that, I did not have a fog over my eyes about what that was trying to do to me. And I do think that, when you haven't done unpacking work, when you haven't done healing work, when you're just searching desperately for comfort and safety, and someone external promises you those things, I think that in the occasional case, I think that can be something someone can deliver on, but the vast majority of time, especially when it just appears up front like that person is everything that you need and want. This is my little kitty. That's love bombing. That's somebody that is trying to fit that role for you, And it's hard to kind of get past that feeling that there is something out there, because everything about our society kind of sells us that. And there's a lot of that sense of dissatisfaction that is just built into how we have to live nowadays. And I think a big difference in answer for, who is actually out there teaching healthy things has to do with who's telling you to look inside, who's telling you to trust yourself, who's telling you to act in love. But your reality totally does affect others, because we live in a society. We're all part of the same collective. We're all one thing. And this idea of solipsism in spirituality has a long history. A lot of people, and it's a big part of what causes spiritual psychosis, is thinking, recognizing some of these signs of the matrix and thinking that means that you're the only one that matters, and thinking that everybody else is like some kind of pawn or object in your game. That's the exact opposite of how it works. We're all one thing. We are all subjective. And it's specifically cutting us off from source and ungrounding us to think of ourselves as individuals, because that's all based in ego, as opposed to more collectively. I do think people should find their own paths, but mistaking yourself for the only person here, the only person that matters, is going to be an obstacle on anyone's healing path every time. But your reality totally does affect others. Thanks for doing a video response. I way appreciate being able to dig into this conversation. And I have thoughts particularly about these ideas about frequency and vibration because of my background experience with music. And I'm in a field that itself is kind of heavily pseudoscientific, to be honest, but music also works in terms of frequency and vibration. And I think that some misunderstandings about how frequency and vibration work feed into these kind of things that can, I think it makes sense that you're thinking they can lead to depersonalization. I think the thing that specifically leads to it is the issue of hierarchy. And I think it's a misconception that a higher frequency is like physically above, as opposed to, in fact, it's just taking place at a shorter period, at shorter periods of time, and with a quicker cycle is really what that means. So it just means like more motion, more concentrated energy is what higher vibe means, is what higher frequency means. And I think that all of these problems of trying to like hierarchify and categorize things can be a huge problem. Okay, and then I just went back and watched your follow-up video too, and I also have thoughts about timelines and timeline shifting. And I'm definitely not an expert in quantum physics, but I have read a little bit about it and tried to kind of wrap my mind at least around how dimensions might work. And I'm not convinced that we don't experience higher dimensions. And again, that term higher, it's like, can we step outside of conceiving of it in terms of a hierarchy, but still maintaining, you know, the nature of that, of the energy, the nature of what the energy is actually doing, which is to say condensing. So anyway, I think that that idea of a line of time as well can be serving, you know, it can serve patriarchal structures when you don't think of time as a cycle. And so I wonder if there is like a word to move away from that with, but while still, you know, following the model that I think makes the most sense, where we are kind of, in a sense, stuck in one particular line, and the way that we would move to higher dimensions would be that we could either move backwards along that line, or we could jump to diverging lines. I think that to some degree we can do those things, and it's not that we haven't experienced them, and it's just more like
ran out of time.
So I totally agree that there's something dangerous going on spiritual TikTok, and that it's our responsibility to call it out and to do our best to educate people, especially children, so that they don't fall into this trap and end up harmed as much as possible. And I think that one thing that might help would be talking about cults more in the way that we've settled into talking about narcissism. So a lot of people might already know that some rhetoric about narcissism had to be kind of pulled back, because for a while kind of everybody was flinging that around as an accusation. And then it made it so that you couldn't really take it seriously. Like, not everyone is a diagnosed narcissist, but everyone does, most people in our society do display narcissistic behaviors. And I think that, again, it just ties back to colonization. A lot of narcissism is about our egos and about the disconnect between what we actually are and what we conceive of ourselves as, and then the defense mechanisms in place when we get triggered out of those things that we're comfortable seeing ourselves as. So I think I like where that rhetoric is coming to, where we can kind of discuss narcissism and also not just levy it as a category to stick someone in fully as an accusation about them as an individual, but it's more like pointing out you know, a kind of behavior that is dangerous and that ultimately points back to colonization. I think cults are kind of the same way. I think that on the one hand, I mean, not everybody is just a cult leader by the strict definition, but on the other hand, I think colonization creates cult leader behavior, especially now in our era of many influencers, where everybody kind of can get a platform depending on a lot of different factors. But regardless, there's a lot of people on here, and I think from my own experience, it's very easy to slip into cult promoting behaviors as a creator, because you're just handed power, and you do have a responsibility to manage it, to hold your boundaries, to heal, to be as healthy as possible, to cultivate a healthy following, to cultivate a healthy, as safe of a space as possible for your following, which absolutely means doing unpacking work, being willing to recognize that you're wrong. All of this, to me, ties back to colonization. And I think decolonizing is really important, and part of that shift might be recognizing that colonization is really pushing us into cult-like behavior unless we actively work against it in the opposite direction.
You who've been on your spiritual journey for a while, what was your first stop on that journey?
I love this question. I think the first steps of my spiritual journey had everything to do with my childhood. And first of all, I was lucky to be around some people that were teaching me some really important things. I had an aunt who understood a lot about energy work. And I also spent a lot of time at my mom's barn. I've mentioned she's a horse trainer. And I think just kind of naturally picked up a lot of things about energy from spending a lot of time around horses. And then I went on to repress all of that for years and years until around the time of my Saturn return when I was 29 or so. I had gone through something that was a horrible ordeal that I basically would call a dark night of the soul. And then I was just at my worst kind of moment. And I was going on YouTube just to get some comfort in like tarot reading videos, astrology videos. And then I had a spiritual awakening and whoosh, we're here.
Those of you who've been on your spiritual journey.
Someone else passed away